Hi, it's Brad, and I'm going to talk to you about a book I read. But first, I want to say there's a new episode of the Hardcore Zen Show, and you should watch it. It's episode 3, and we're not getting a lot of viewers. I'll put a link below. The subject is suicide, and we actually make suicide funny. Now, I should say suicide is not funny at all. A few people I've known have committed suicide. I don't think it's funny. But we actually made a really interesting, deep discussion which doesn't get so heavy and on you that you don't want to do it. I think it's a good show, so please go watch that. Today's episode is going to be about a book I just finished reading called The Great Silence by Milan M. Sirkovich, I think. Published by Oxford University Press. Oh, there it is, Oxford University Press. And it's a real good book, and I was really excited about this book. So excited when I heard it was coming out. I was like pre-ordering and trying to make sure I got it. Ordered it on Amazon Germany because I knew I'd be in Germany the day it came out, and I wanted to get it like right when it was new. So it's a new book and cool. The book is about Fermi's paradox, and if you don't know Fermi's paradox, I'll explain it to you. A guy named Enrico Fermi is a great scientist, very well respected. He's having lunch one day in the 1950s with some of his science friends, and they're talking about aliens, probably in the context of the UFO boom that was going on at the time. And he basically said, well, if there's intelligent life all over the universe, then where is everybody? Meaning we don't see any clear evidence, UFOs notwithstanding, because they're very nebulous things, and I'm not a real UFO buff in spite of my Roswell t-shirt I'm wearing today. I'm very skeptical of that stuff. But discounting that, we don't see any evidence at all. We look out into space, we listen for radio signals, we've got all kinds of sophisticated methods, and we can't find them. And the problem has only become worse since the 1950s. In the 1950s, all we had was a few aerials pointed out into space listening for radio signals and maybe television signals. These days, in addition to that, we have space-based telescopes like Hubble. We have probes going out into deep space, into the far planets and things like that. And we haven't seen anything, any real strong evidence for other civilizations like ours. So why? And this is a problem that people kind of don't take very seriously because they're like, you just science fiction nuts thinking about Star Trek and stuff, and you don't matter. But this is actually a very interesting problem. It's what makes this book really interesting because the author takes this as a philosophical problem. And he says that there's 4 philosophical assumptions that underlie most of science and most of contemporary thought. And if Fermi's paradox holds, then one of these assumptions must be either wrong or in need of serious modification. And these are really basic assumptions. So let me tell you what they are. On page 21, he starts laying it out, philosophical assumptions. So the first one is scientific realism. And let's see how he defines scientific realism. It implies that there is a material world out there composed of objects that occupy space, have a duration in time, and have properties such as size, mass, shape, texture, smell, taste, and color. These properties are usually perceived correctly and obey the laws of physics as we know them at the moment. While our perceptions might turn out to be untrue under more careful investigation, for example, it might turn out that solid bodies are in fact mostly empty space, which is true, we need some very weak version of realism, which is exactly what usually goes under the label of scientific realism. So that's one of the assumptions. So we assume that our observations are correct, that when we say we don't see any evidence of alien life in terms of civilizations in outer space, then our observations must be correct, that we don't see it, and that means it isn't there. The second 2 assumptions, which kind of go together, are Copernicanism and gradualism. Now, Copernicanism is the idea that the Earth is not special, as elucidated by Copernicus, who said that the Earth is not the center of the universe. He wasn't obviously the first one who said that, but he really started the ball rolling with that, so we call it by his name. Same thing with Buddha, just an aside there. The reason we associate Buddhism with Buddha is because he's the guy who kind of started the ball rolling. Not that he was the first person to ever discover these truths that he discovered. He wasn't, and he never said he was, but he started a kind of movement based around these truths, and same with Copernicus. So one of the ideas of Copernicanism and gradualism, which also goes by the name of Darwinism, that things change gradually and evolve and evolution happens, is that given our age, as we understand it, the age of our solar system, we would expect that there must be solar systems much older than ours. And given Copernicanism, which says that things are pretty much the same all over, that the same elements, and we know this from our studies, the same elements that exist on Earth exist in other places, we can assume that the same physical processes go on. So it makes sense to assume that there is animal life, and animal life evolves, and intelligence evolves as a consequence of that. And we don't see any evidence of this, which is very interesting. You would expect that, given the age of the galaxy and the universe, there could be civilizations in which their equivalent of the year 2018 was 1,000 years ago, or 10,000 years ago, or 100,000 years ago, or 1,000,000 years ago, or even as much as 1,000,000,000 years ago. So if you can imagine a civilization for whom their version of 2018 was 1,000,000 years ago, which is a completely reasonable assumption, then we would assume that we'd see something out there. And that leads to the fourth of the philosophical assumptions that we have here, which he calls common sense economical assumptions. And it just means that if there is a high degree of technology going on somewhere else, a much higher degree than we have, then we would see evidence of it. We'd see large-scale structures, large-scale artificial structures. When we looked up in the sky, we would see, for example, what they call Dyson spheres. And a Dyson sphere is when you enclose an entire star with a man-made or intelligence-made object that captures all the energy of the star. We don't know if it's even possible to create these things. There's an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation in which they find one that is dysfunctioning. It's been abandoned by whoever created it, and it's kind of an interesting episode. But we don't know, and there's some people who actually challenge this, saying that if you built a Dyson sphere, there'd be no way to keep it from falling into the star. But even if there isn't such a thing as a Dyson sphere, then there would be some kind of large-scale something that we would see. We would look up and point our telescopes in the area of Sagittarius and go, hey, there's the Mulabuba Empire there doing their thing way up 400 light years away. But we don't see anything like that. The book itself is pretty dense and pretty philosophical, but also very readable. The author is hip enough that he quotes the song In the Year 2525, and he even mentions all these people who covered it, which I didn't even know. I only knew that Zager and Evans did it, and I think I knew R.E.M. did it, which he mentions. But there's other people, which is In the year 2525, if man is still alive, if woman can survive. I don't know if I'll get a copyright claim for singing that, but let's hope not. Anyway, and he gives all his different ideas, or the different ideas he's collected. They're not necessarily his. I don't think any of them are really his, or he doesn't claim they are. He gives them funny, interesting names, like the galactic stomach ache is one of them, which is the idea that as a civilization progresses, we start to manipulate the world to our liking, but that this may not be the best thing for a biological organism to do, and we're already seeing that in ourselves, in that we're becoming more susceptible to certain kinds of diseases and things because we aren't exposed to them often, and we don't build up an immunity to them, and there's all sorts of other things that happen, and if you extrapolate that, maybe this happens and this is the downfall of a lot of civilizations. The problem with explanations like that is you'd have to say that this happens everywhere. There's a thing he talks about called the Great Filter, and there may be some kind of something that prevents any civilization from going to the next step that we think makes sense, because we are creatures who colonized our whole planet, and we're thinking very hard about colonizing space, so we would expect that other creatures like us, intelligent thinking technological creatures, might want to colonize space, but maybe that's not true. Maybe there's something that prevents them from doing that, or maybe there's something in our future in which we'll understand that, no, that doesn't make sense. We shouldn't colonize space. I just read an interesting novel about this called Aurora, in which it's about the first settlers to live on a planet outside our solar system, and they basically, spoiler alert, find out you can't live on a planet that you weren't evolved to live on, which is an interesting idea. So there you go. So there may be something to that, and maybe we'll find out later on that they're just things that can't be done, that we assume can be done. So, real interesting book. Highly recommend it. Thanks a lot for viewing, and as always, links to my Patreon and PayPal accounts are below. That's how I make my living. I really appreciate your donations. See you next time.